5 red flags that feel like love but aren't. How many things have you called love simply because they felt intense? Think about that honestly. Not healthy, not stable, not peaceful, intense. Because some relationships do not win you over by making you feel safe. They win you over by making you feel emotionally unforgettable. Someone cannot get enough of you. Someone needs constant closeness. Someone makes you feel deeply wanted, deeply important, almost impossible to replace. And it feels incredible until it doesn't. Because here is the uncomfortable truth nobody talks about enough. Some of the biggest red flags in relationships do not push people away. They pull people closer. That is why they are so effective. You are not looking at something that feels obviously wrong. You are looking at something that feels emotionally rewarding. The constant attention feels like devotion. The jealousy feels like passion. The fast attachment feels like destiny. The emotional dependence feels like proof that what you have is rare. And before you realize it, you are no longer asking, is this healthy? You are asking, how do I hold on to this? That shift changes everything. Because many red flags survive, not because people cannot see them. They survive because people emotionally benefit from them before they emotionally suffer from them. Read that again. Some warning signs feel good before they become painful. That is what makes them dangerous. Today, we are exposing 5 red flags people romanticize, defend, and sometimes mistake for proof of deep love. And one of them might challenge something you still secretly believe was beautiful. Because the first red flag begins with a feeling almost everyone wants to experience. Feeling incredibly special, incredibly understood, incredibly connected, far too quickly. Let's start with a red flag people almost never question in the moment. Because honestly, why would they? You meet someone. The connection feels immediate, effortless, unusually deep. Conversations become personal very quickly. The emotional closeness feels intense, almost unreal. And you start hearing things like, I've never met anyone like you. I feel like I've known you forever. This connection is different. Nobody understands me the way you do. Now listen carefully. None of those phrases are automatically unhealthy. That is not the point. The question is not whether someone makes you feel special. The question is, how quickly does emotional exclusivity become the center of the relationship? Because some dynamics accelerate intimacy so fast that emotional pacing quietly disappears, and that can feel intoxicating. Why? Because human beings are wired for significance. We want to feel deeply recognized, chosen, emotionally important to someone. So when someone creates the feeling that you are uniquely understood almost immediately, your nervous system can become attached before trust has actually had time to develop. That distinction matters a lot, because emotional closeness and emotional knowledge are not the same thing. You can feel intensely connected to someone you barely truly know. The time is uncomfortable to admit, but very real, and sometimes the emotional speed itself becomes the seduction. The relationship feels exciting because it bypasses uncertainty. It bypasses gradual discovery. It bypasses the slow, sometimes frustrating process of letting trust naturally build. Instead, it creates a shortcut, an emotional fast lane toward exclusivity. And here is the hidden danger. Sometimes the problem is not that someone makes you feel special. It is that they make exclusivity feel safer than gradual trust. You begin prioritizing emotional intensity over emotional observation. You feel close enough to stop asking important questions, close enough to overlook inconsistencies, close enough to trust the feeling before fully understanding the person. And once emotional speed becomes associated with love, another red flag becomes surprisingly easy to romanticize. The feeling that someone's insecurity, dependency, or fear of losing you. is proof that you are deeply loved. Red flag 2, when their insecurity makes you feel important. This red flag is subtle because it does not always feel controlling, unhealthy, or emotionally heavy in the beginning. Sometimes it feels flattering. Someone is scared to lose you. Someone needs constant reassurance from you. Someone becomes visibly affected by your attention, your distance, your availability. And part of you interprets that reaction as love. Deep love. Powerful love. You think, they care this much? They really don't want to lose me. I matter that deeply to someone. That feeling can be incredibly seductive, especially if you spent part of your life feeling unseen, emotionally disposable, or easy to replace, because suddenly, your presence carries enormous emotional weight. You are not just wanted, you are needed, and that distinction can create a powerful emotional high. But here's the question people rarely stop to ask. Is being emotionally necessary the same thing as being emotionally loved? Those are not identical experiences. Because someone can depend on your attention without knowing how to genuinely respect your emotional well-being. Someone can fear losing you without knowing how to love you in a healthy way. Someone can desperately need your reassurance while quietly exhausting your nervous system. That is the uncomfortable complexity. We often romanticize emotional fragility when it revolves around us. We interpret their insecurity as emotional depth, their dependency as devotion, their fear as proof of our value. But sometimes, what you are calling love is actually emotional responsibility being handed to you without your consent. You become the stabilizer, the regulator, the emotional oxygen supply. Your reassurance becomes necessary for the relationship to remain calm. Your absence becomes emotional emergency. Your boundaries start feeling dangerous. And because part of you feels important inside this dynamic, you may not immediately notice how heavy the role is becoming. That is the trap. Feeling necessary can feel powerful, meaningful, even beautiful. But feeling necessary is not the same thing as feeling loved. Read that again slowly. Feeling necessary is not the same thing as feeling loved. And when that line becomes blurred, something deeper often starts happening. The relationship slowly stops being something you experience. It becomes the emotional system you depend on to function. Red flag 3. The relationship becomes your emotional climate. This is where the conversation gets deeply personal. Because this red flag does not always look like losing yourself. It feels more subtle than that, more psychological, more internal. Your mood starts depending on them more than you realize. A message from them can change your entire day. Their approval creates emotional relief. Their distance creates emotional instability. Their warmth energizes you. Their coldness drains you. And slowly, your emotional weather begins moving according to theirs. Pay attention to how powerful that shift is. You are no longer simply sharing your emotional life with someone. Your emotional life is starting to organize itself around them. Good interaction? You feel secure, connected, alive. Conflict? Your nervous system crashes. You cannot focus. You replay conversations. You struggle to emotionally regulate until things feel okay again. That pattern matters, because love should support your emotional life. It should not become the only system keeping it running. Read that again. Love can enrich your emotional world. It should not become the machine responsible for stabilizing your identity, your peace, your sense of worth, your ability to function. But this red flag is easy to romanticize. Why? Because emotional dependency often feels like profound connection from the inside. You tell yourself, we're deeply attached. We affect each other so much. This relationship is intense because it matters. Maybe. But intensity alone does not tell you whether something is healthy. Sometimes, it only tells you how emotionally entangled the system has become. That distinction is important. Because when your emotional balance becomes overly dependent on another person's behavior, you start losing something quietly: your internal center of gravity. Your ability to remain emotionally anchored even when the relationship experiences tension, distance, disagreement, or uncertainty. And here is the dangerous part. Many people mistake this emotional volatility for proof of passion. The dramatic arguments, the emotional highs, the powerful reconciliations, the feeling that everything becomes bigger, louder, deeper inside the relationship. They call it chemistry. They call it real love. But what if some of that intensity is not emotional depth? What if it is emotional exhaustion being mistaken for connection? Red flag 4. Conflict feels like proof of passion. This red flag hides inside one of the most romanticized ideas about love: the belief that if a relationship is truly passionate, it must be intense, explosive, emotionally consuming. The kind of connection where arguments are dramatic, emotions run high, doors almost close, and then somehow the reconciliation feels unbelievably powerful. You know the feeling, the painful argument, the emotional distance, the tension. Then the conversation that lasts until 2 in the morning, the vulnerability, the tears, the reunion, the overwhelming sense of closeness afterward. And you think, see, this proves how much we care. But slow down for a second. Does emotional intensity automatically mean emotional depth? Because some people do not become attached to love itself, they become attached to emotional contrast: the low, the relief, the chaos, the repair. The emotional roller coaster starts creating its own chemistry, and chemistry can be misleading. Think about how easy it becomes to mistake relief for intimacy. After conflict, peace feels extraordinary. After distance, affection feels amplified. After emotional pain, connection feels almost euphoric. That does not automatically mean the relationship became healthier. Sometimes it means your nervous system is reacting to contrast. That is an important distinction. Because some relationships train people to interpret emotional exhaustion as emotional meaning. The harder the relationship becomes, the more significant it feels. The more draining the dynamic becomes, the more people convince themselves it must be deep. Because surely something this intense has to be real, right? That logic traps a lot of people. They start using conflict as emotional evidence. We fight because we care. We're passionate. We just love hard. Maybe. Or maybe emotional instability has quietly become part of what your brain recognizes as connection. That possibility deserves honest attention. Because healthy love does not need repeated emotional chaos to prove it matters. It does not require constant destabilization to create closeness. And when conflict repeatedly becomes the mechanism producing intimacy, another subtle red flag often appears. You begin changing yourself in small, polite, reasonable ways. Not because someone forced you, because it seems easier, more mature, more loving, and without noticing it. You start shrinking. Red flag 5. You start shrinking, but call it compromise. This may be one of the most dangerous red flags on this list because it rarely feels dramatic while it is happening. It feels reasonable, mature, understandable. You tell yourself you're being flexible, considerate, protective of the relationship. And honestly, that sounds healthy. Until you look closer, you stop bringing up certain opinions, not because you changed your mind, because the conversation no longer feels worth the tension. You become quieter around certain topics. You adjust pieces of your personality. You avoid harmless behaviors. You explain yourself less, not because you feel more free, because you are managing reactions. That distinction matters, because the most dangerous identity loss often happens politely, not through obvious domination, through subtle self-editing. Tiny accommodations repeated so many times, they start feeling normal. You call it compromise, but slowly, Compromise becomes compression. You are taking up less space emotionally, less space intellectually, less space behaviorally. And the frightening part? You may even feel proud of how much you are adapting. You think, this is what healthy relationships require. This is maturity. This is choosing us over my ego. Maybe sometimes, but there is an uncomfortable question worth asking. At what point does adaptation stop being love and start becoming disappearance? Because healthy compromise does not require the gradual erosion of your individuality. It does not demand that your personality becomes smaller to keep the relationship stable. Healthy love should allow you to remain recognizable to yourself. That line is important. Because when you consistently feel safer editing yourself than expressing yourself, something deeper may be happening. You are no longer protecting connection. You are protecting harmony at the cost of authenticity. And people can live inside that dynamic for years without calling it pain, because it looks polite, functional, responsible, but emotional self-abandonment often wears very respectable clothing. Which brings us to the truth tying all 5 red flags together. Why do people miss them? Why do they defend them? Why do they sometimes mistake them for proof of extraordinary love? Because many red flags do not hurt first. They reward first. So let's go back to the question that started this conversation. What if some of the experiences that made you feel the most loved were actually your first warning signs? That question matters because many red flags do not survive by looking dangerous. I survive by feeling emotionally rewarding before they become emotionally costly. That is why people miss them. Not because they are weak, not because they are blind, because the dynamic gives them something meaningful before it asks them to sacrifice something important. You feel incredibly special. You feel deeply needed. You feel emotionally fused. You feel passion so intense it seems impossible to question. You feel like protecting the relationship means becoming more accommodating, more understanding, more flexible. And little by little, the discomfort gets renamed. The anxiety becomes chemistry. The dependency becomes closeness. The emotional exhaustion becomes passion. The shrinking becomes maturity. That is the hidden mechanism. You are not ignoring pain. You are reinterpreting it. That is a powerful psychological difference, because once discomfort starts wearing the language of devotion, recognizing red flags becomes much harder. You tell yourself, this is what real love feels like. Relationships are hard. Nobody loves perfectly. And yes, relationships are imperfect. Love can involve misunderstanding, growth, conflict, vulnerability. But healthy love should not require you to constantly reinterpret your discomfort as proof that the relationship is meaningful. Read that again slowly. Healthy love should not require you to constantly reinterpret discomfort as devotion. Love is not emotional acceleration disguised as destiny. It is not dependency disguised as intimacy. It is not chaos disguised as chemistry. It is not the slow disappearance of your identity disguised as compromise. And maybe that is the question I want you to sit with after this conversation. Which red flag did you once mistake for love? Which feeling did you defend? Because part of you desperately wanted it to be real. And what changed the moment you finally recognized the difference?